Persepolis, 480 BC. The city you know in 2026 as a ruined archaeological site in the Fars province of modern Iran, about 60 kilometers northeast of Shiraz. Picture a drinking cup cast from solid gold, shaped like a lion's foreleg. Claws extended, the leg tapering upward into a wide bowl, its surface engraved with scales and fur so fine you need to stand close to understand what you are seeing. It weighs as much as a small child. When liquid is poured in, the gold warms immediately to the temperature of your hand. This morning, a man is carrying it across the largest stone terrace ever built. The terrace of Persepolis rises 20 meters above the plain, on fitted limestone blocks cut so precisely that no mortar was needed. They hold each other by weight alone. On the terrace stand the throne room, the treasury, the audience hall, the residential palaces of the king. The audience hall alone has 72 columns, each one 20 meters high. We will call the man carrying the cup Artabanus, a Persian noble name so common in this court that several men on this terrace answer to it. He is a senior official who has served the king for 15 years. Today is the morning of Nowruz, the Persian New Year. And on the morning of Nowruz, every great noble in the empire brings a gift to the king. Artabanus has been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Today we follow him through a single day inside the wealthiest empire on earth. The Persian Empire in 480 BC stretches from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, from the Black Sea to Egypt. The largest political entity the world has ever seen. That is all the context we need. The empire will speak for itself through the objects. Let's step inside. On an ordinary morning, Artabanus rises early. On Nowruz, he has not slept at all. His body servant has been preparing his clothing since before midnight. Persian court dress is a ranked system, as precisely regulated as military insignia. The color, cut, and material of a noble's robe communicate his exact position in the hierarchy to every person who sees him. Artabanus wears the kandys, a long-sleeved garment of deep purple wool, its hem embroidered with pomegranates and lotus flowers in gold thread. It is worn draped over the shoulders with the sleeves hanging empty. This is not a design error. It signals that he is not a man who does physical work. His hands are never meant to be encumbered. On his wrists, gold torques twisted from solid rod, their terminals shaped as facing lion heads. Around his neck, a pectoral of linked gold discs, each one the thickness of 3 coins. His hair and beard are oiled, curled, and set with a heated iron stylus by a barber, giving the tight ringlet appearance visible in every Persian court portrait carved into the terrace walls downstairs. The gold rhyton has been polishing since dawn. When Artabanus lifts it, he will not set it down again until it is in the king's presence. The perfume he wears is rose oil from Edirne, a scent so associated with this court that foreign ambassadors carry small bottles of it home as proof they were inside the palace. He checks the rhyton one last time and walks out onto the terrace. Artabanus does not live in the palace. No court official does except the king. His residence occupies the lower slope below the terrace, a walled compound entered through a single guarded gate. Inside, a garden, 2 reception halls, a residential wing, stables. The garden is a paradiesa, an old Persian word meaning a walled enclosure. The Greeks borrowed it, changed it slightly, passed it into Latin and French, and eventually into English. In English today, the word is paradise. The concept entered the Western imagination from gardens like this one. The paradiesa has cypress trees planted in rows so precise they look measured with instruments, because they were. Channels of water run from a central pool along stone troughs to the base of each tree. Roses grow against the inner walls. A pair of peacocks move through the garden with the unhurried authority of creatures that know they are ornamental. In the dry highland plain of Fars, where rain comes rarely and summer is brutal, a garden with running water is not decoration. It is dominance over the landscape. The reception hall is furnished with low platforms covered in flat-woven Persian kilims, their geometric patterns so widely copied that most people today see them without knowing their origin. On the walls hang large felt panels embroidered with hunting scenes. The ceiling is cedar from Lebanon, still faintly fragrant after decades. The Nowruz procession moves through the Artabanus, the audience hall, in a sequence that has been rehearsed and planned for weeks. Artabanus takes his place in the line. The ritual is called the proskynesis. Greek writers who witnessed it were horrified. To them, it looked like worship, like a man treating another man as a god. They were wrong. The proskynesis is a precise statement of hierarchical position. The depth of the bow is calibrated to rank. A noble of Artabanus's standing bows deeply but does not prostrate himself fully. A lesser official does. Only the royal family stands fully upright without bowing at all. The bow is not worship, it is a vocabulary. Artabanus counts his steps through the columns. There is a correct pace for this procession, and deviating is noticed. When he reaches the king's position, he performs the proskynesis, straightens, presents the right arm with both hands and a downcast gaze. Looking directly at the king is permitted, but must never look bold, and speaks the formal presentation phrase in Old Persian that he has rehearsed since he was a junior official. The king receives the gift without speaking. A chamberlain records it. Artabanus steps back, bows again, withdraws. The entire exchange lasts 90 seconds. It is the most important 90 seconds of his year. 3 days a week the king hunts, and the senior court hunts with him. The hunting park adjacent to Persepolis is another paradisa, large enough to contain deer, wild boar, and lions kept specifically for this purpose. The king rides at the center. Court nobles ride in positions relative to the king that communicate their exact standing. The closer your horse, the higher your rank. Artabanus has ridden at 12 horse lengths for 3 years. Last season he was at 15. The change was noticed by everyone and discussed by no one. Persian nobles are among the finest horsemen in the ancient world. Horsemanship is the first skill taught to Persian aristocratic children before language and before religion. A court noble who rides badly is a contradiction in terms. After the hunt, the group dismounts in a grove of plane trees, deliberately planted, as all Persian shade trees are, and servants bring food, wine, and water. The conversations that happen here, between horses and shade, and the informal loosening that follows physical exertion, determine who rises next season and who does not. The Nowruz banquet is held in the Artabanus itself, with 10,000 guests. The number is recorded in the administrative tablets with the same precision as a ration payment. Guests sit in ranked sections at a measured distance from the king's table. The food served to each section decreases in quality and variety as the distance increases. To sit close is to eat the best food in the world. Everyone present knows where they sit, has been placed correctly, and understands exactly what that placement means. The dishes reaching Artabanus's section: whole sheep roasted and basted throughout the day with pomegranate and saffron from the eastern provinces, river sturgeon from the Caspian with pickled herb sauces, young kid braised with dried figs, dates, and apricots from last autumn's royal storehouses, flatbreads hot from the tandoor with thick yogurt and crushed walnuts and dried rose petals, pistachios, roasted in salt, their harvest managed by the state as a royal prerogative. Wine in rhytons, not unlike the one Artabanus presented this morning. Served also in rock crystal cups, whose transparency is itself a marvel. The ability to see through a vessel as hard as stone, in 480 BC, is the kind of object that makes visiting dignitaries go quiet. Musicians throughout. Formal Persian poetry recited in praise of the king's lineage. Then, gradually, the informal conversations of 10,000 people, which produce a human roar audible outside the terrace. Artabanus eats carefully. He is watching 3 separate conversations at nearby tables simultaneously. He refills his cup slowly. Tonight is not for looseness. It is for observation. The banquet ends after midnight. Artabanus walks to the far edge of the terrace. The plain of Fars spreads south in absolute darkness, broken only by distant fires from the city below. To the east, mountains. To the west, the road towards Susa, the administrative capital, 3 weeks' travel. Somewhere beyond that, Babylon. Somewhere beyond Babylon, the Greek cities that have been giving the king trouble. He thinks about the Rhyton, now in the treasury. He thinks about the riding formation this morning, 12 horse lengths. He thinks about a conversation at dinner with an official who oversees Western appointments, a conversation that ended with an invitation to meet privately next week. Whether this is an opportunity or a test, he cannot yet determine. In this court, they are sometimes the same thing. He has spent 15 years learning to read this court the way a navigator reads the sea. Not from any single landmark, but from the combined pattern of small signals. He is good at it. He knows he is good at it. This is the most useful thing he knows about himself. The mountains to the east are invisible in the dark. The empire is there anyway, in every direction, even in darkness. It has never needed to be seen to be felt. A message sent from Persepolis reaches Sardis on the Aegean coast, nearly 3,000 kilometers in 7 days. The Royal Road maintains posting stations every 25 kilometers, each staffed with fresh horses, food, and armed guards. A traveler with the right authorization tablet can cross the empire faster than information travels by any other means in the ancient world. The authorization tablets specify exactly who is traveling, how many people are in the party, what rations they receive at each station, and in whose name they travel. A senior official like Artabanus carries a tablet that opens every station on the road. It is stamped with a seal impression checked against records at each stop. It cannot be forged. The empire also maintains inspectors, the king's eyes and ears, as the Greeks called them, royal officials who travel unannounced, audit the satrapies, and report directly to the king in writing. Every governor knows they exist. No governor knows when one is coming. Artabanus served as an inspector once, early in his career. He does not speak of it. Men who have held that role are watched carefully for the rest of their careers. Not distrusted, just noted. Marriage at Artabanus's social level is negotiated between families with reference to court standing, land holdings, and the king's known attitude toward both families. His wife, Erdabama, appears in the administrative tablets as a principal in her own right, receiving rations, issuing work orders to the household workshops, traveling under her own authorization documents. She manages the compound's textile production, looms staffed by female workers producing embroidered garments that are both household goods and trade goods. She issues work orders without asking Artabanus's permission. The tablets show it plainly. In the Persepolis administrative records, women of the noble class are not background figures. They are named, funded, and documented. Their eldest son has been presented at court once, at age 12. He now serves in the palace as a court page, simultaneously an honor, a training, and an unspoken form of security. The sons of great nobles serve near the king. This is how loyalty is structured. 30 kilometers from Persepolis, in an orange limestone cliff face, the royal tombs are cut directly into the rock, cross-shaped openings sealed with carved stone. The facade showing the king standing on a throne supported by the subject nations, receiving the favor of Ahura Mazda above. The cliff already holds the tombs of Darius and 2 earlier kings when Artabanus is alive. Xerxes is preparing his own. Artabanus will not have a cliff-cut tomb. His burial will be the Persian style, the body sealed in wax, placed in a stone-lined chamber, a fire altar burning at the grave for a period after. Zoroastrian priests conduct the rites in Avestan, the ancient liturgical language preserved intact for ceremony, the way Latin will be preserved in medieval European churches centuries from now. His legacy is not architectural, it is genealogical. His son's position at court, the family name in the ration records, the connection to the king's household that his 15 years of service established. These are what persist. His grandson may serve at a court where the family's history of reliable service still carries weight. That is the bet. That the name in the records, stamped with the cylinder seal impression one more time, will still mean something when someone who never met him reads it. The gardens of Persepolis were burned by Alexander the Great in 330 BC, 150 years from tonight. The cedar ceilings of the Apadana will fall to ash. The column capitals will topple. The carved procession of 28 nations on the staircase will be buried under drifted soil for 2,000 years before anyone sees it again. The word paradise will survive. It will travel from Old Persian into Greek, into Latin, into French, into English, arriving in every language further from its origin, but carrying the same core meaning it had in Artabanus's garden, a walled enclosure where order is imposed on chaos, and water is made to flow where nature would not send it. Tonight, the garden smells of rose and cypress. The torches burn on the terrace. In the treasury, a gold lion's leg rhyton catches the lamplight beside 1,000 others from 1,000 other Nowruz mornings. Each one a 90-second exchange between a man who wanted to keep his position and a king who had not yet decided whether to let him. The plain is dark and still. The empire, in every direction, breathes. In this video, I use modern AI tools to recreate daily life inside the Achaemenid Persian court. Persepolis, 480 BC. These scenes are AI-generated interpretations based on historical records, archaeological evidence, and administrative tablets from the period. They are designed to help us imagine the atmosphere and realities of that world as closely as possible.